She was there in his hand. She was the living equivalent of what he held. A woman. The stone was the statue of a woman. A Venus grosser than Mrs. Blatter, her belly swelling with children, tits like mountains, cunt a valley that began at her navel and gaped to the world. All this time, under the cloth and the cross, they bowed their heads to a goddess. Ron stepped off the altar and began to run down the aisle, pushing Mrs. Blatter, the policeman, and the lunatic aside. "Don't go out," said Ivanhoe. "It's right outside." Ron held the Venus tight, feeling her weight in his hands and taking security from her. Behind him, the verger was screeching a warning to his lord. Yes, it was a warning for sure. Ron kicked open the door. On every side, fire, a flaming cot, a corpse, it was the postmaster, with its feet burning, a dog skinned by fire hurtling past, and Rawhead, of course, silhouetted against a panorama of flames. It looked round, perhaps because it heard the warnings the verger was yelling, but more likely, he thought, because it knew without being told, that the woman had been found. "Here!" Ron yelled. "I'm here! I'm here!" It was coming for him now, with the steady gait of a victor closing in to claim its final and absolute victory. Doubt surged up in Ron. Why did it come so surely to meet him, not seeming to care about the weapon he carried in his hands? Hadn't it seen? Hadn't it heard the warning? Unless... Oh, God in heaven. Unless Coot had been wrong. Unless it was only a stone he held in his hands, a useless, meaningless lump of stone. Then a pair of hands grabbed him round the neck. The lunatic. A low voice spat the word, "Fucker," in his ear. Ron watched Rawhead approaching, heard the lunatic screeching now, "Here it is, fetch him! Kill him, here it is!" Without warning, the grip slackened, and Ron half turned to see Ivanhoe dragging the lunatic back against the church hall. The mouth in the verger's broken face continued to screech, "He's here! Here! Here!" Ron looked back at Rawhead. The beast was almost on him, and he was too slow to raise the stone in self-defence, but Rawhead had no intention of taking him. It was Declan he was smelling and hearing. Ivanhoe released Declan as Rawhead's huge hands veered past Ron and fumbled for the lunatic. What followed was unwatchable. Ron couldn't bear to see the hands take Declan apart, but he heard the gabble of pleas become whoops of disbelieving grief. When he looked around, there was nothing recognisably human on ground or wall. And Rawhead was coming for him now, coming to do the same or worse. The huge head craned round to fix on Ron, its maw gaping, and Ron saw how the fire had wounded Forehead. The beast had been careless in the enthusiasm for destruction. Fire had caught its face and upper torso, its body hair was crisped, its mane was stubble, and the flesh on the left-hand side of its face was black and blistered. The flames had roasted its eyeballs, they were swimming in gums of mucus and tears. That was why it had followed Declan's voice and bypassed Ron. It could scarcely see. But it must see now, it must. "Here, here," said Ron. "Here I am." Rawhead heard. He looked without seeing, his eyes trying to focus. "Here, I'm here." Rawhead growled in his chest. His burned face pained him. He wanted to be away from here, away in the cool of a birch thicket, moon-washed. His dimmed eyes found the stone. The Homo sapien was nursing it like a baby. It was difficult for Rawhead to see clearly, but he knew. It ached in his mind, that image. It pricked him. It teased him. It was just a symbol, of course, a sign of the power, not the power itself. But his mind made no such distinction. To him, the stone was the thing he feared most. The bleeding woman, her gaping hole, eating seed and spitting children. It was life, that hole, that woman. It was endless fecundity. It terrified him. Rawhead stepped back, his own shit running freely down his leg. The fear on his face gave Ron strength. He pressed home his advantage, closing in after the retreating beast, dimly aware that Ivanhoe was rallying allies around him, armed figures waiting at the corners of his vision, eager to bring the fire razor down. His own strength was failing him. The stone, lifted high above his head so Rawhead could see it plainly, seemed heavier by the moment. "Go on," he said quietly to the gathering zealots. "Go on, take him. Take him." They began to close in even before he finished speaking. Rawhead smelt them more than saw them. His hurting eyes were fixed on the woman. His teeth slid from their sheaths in preparation for the attack. The stench of humanity closed around him from every direction. Panic overcame his superstitions for one moment, and he snatched down towards Ron, sealing himself against the stone. The attack took Ron by surprise. The claws sank in his scalp. Blood poured down over his face. Then the crowd closed in. Human hands, weak, white human hands, were laid on Rawhead's body. Fists beat on his spine. Nails raked his skin. He let Ron go as someone took a knife to the backs of his legs and hamstrung him. The agony made him howl the sky down, or so it seemed. In Rawhead's roasted eyes the stars reeled as he fell backwards onto the road, his back cracking under him. They took the advantage immediately, overpowering him by sheer weight of numbers. He snapped off a finger here, a face there, but they would not be stopped now. Their hatred was old. In their bones, did they but know it. He thrashed under their assaults for as long as he could, but he knew death was certain. There would be no resurrection this time. No waiting in the earth for an age until their descendants forgot him. He'd be snuffed out absolutely, and there would be nothingness. He became quieter at the thought, and looked up as best he could to where the little father was standing. Their eyes met as they had on the road when he'd taken the boy, but now Rawhead's look had lost its power to transfix. His face was empty and sterile as the moon, defeated long before Ron slammed the stone down between his eyes. The skull was soft. It buckled inwards, and a slop of brain spattered the road. The king went out. It was suddenly over, without ceremony or celebration. Out once and for all. There was no cry. Ron left the stone where it lay, half buried in the face of the beast. He stood up groggily and felt his head. His scalp was loose. His fingertips touched his skull. Blood came and came. But there were arms to support him, and nothing to fear if he slept. It went unnoticed, but in death Rawhead's bladder was emptying. A stream of urine pulsed from the corpse and ran down the road. The rivulet streamed in the chilling air, its scummy nose sniffing left and right as it looked for a place to drain. After a few feet it found the gutter and ran along it a while to a crack in the tarmac. There it drained off into the welcoming earth.